As Akira stepped out of the water and returned to the shore, her heart froze. Her beads were gone. She blinked in disbelief, looking around in frantic desperation. She checked the ground, the nearby trees, but there was no sign of the precious beads. Akira's pulse quickened as she searched through the soft grass, but the beads were nowhere to be found. It was impossible. No one had been here, except for her. The river was quiet, too quiet. Her heart sank as fear began to replace the panic. Without her beads, she could not return to the water. She would be powerless, unable to protect the river or the village. The river whispered its secrets to no one but her. Akira, the mermaid of Edema, had always known peace in the embrace of the flowing waters. But on this evening, as the sun dipped low, casting gold over the river's surface, something felt wrong. The beads, her most cherished treasure, lay untouched on the riverbank, sparkling like stars in the fading light. But when she stepped from the river, a chill ran through her. The beads were gone, and in that moment the river itself began to mourn. As her first tear touched the earth, the ground trembled, the waters surged, and the peaceful village of Edema was drowned in a flood unlike anything they had ever seen. In the village of Edema, nestled between the towering trees and winding rivers of the great forest, there lived a being unlike any other. The villagers knew of her, but none had ever truly seen her. They spoke of her in hushed tones, as the protector of the sacred river, the mermaid Akira. She was a creature of beauty and grace, her long dark hair flowing like a silk curtain behind her as she emerged from the water each evening. Every evening, as the sun began to sink below the horizon, Akira would climb from the river's depths to bathe. The villagers often heard her soft song carried on the evening breeze, a haunting melody that filled their hearts with both peace and longing. Akira's songs were the voice of the river, and it was said that those who listened would be blessed with good fortune. But Akira was no ordinary being. She had a deep connection to the river, one that was bound by her most cherished possession, her beads. These beads, made of shimmering stones, were not just jewelry, they were the source of her power. They had been gifted to her by the river itself. Each bead carried a piece of the river's magic, and together they formed a bond that tied Akira to the waters that flowed through the village of Edema. This evening, as the sun began to set, Akira approached the riverbank. She placed the beads on the soft sandy shore with great care, arranging them in a circle before stepping into the water. The air was cool, the river soothing as she let the current wash over her. She sang her familiar song, a song that only the river could understand. But this evening, something was different. As Akira stepped out of the water and returned to the shore, her heart froze. Her beads were gone. She blinked in disbelief, looking around in frantic desperation. She checked the ground, the nearby trees, but there was no sign of the precious beads. Akira's pulse quickened as she searched through the soft grass, but the beads were nowhere to be found. It was impossible. No one had been here, except for her. The river was quiet, too quiet. Her heart sank as fear began to replace the panic. Without her beads, she could not return to the water. She would be powerless, unable to protect the river or the village. Who could have taken them? Akira whispered to the wind. Her voice trembled with grief, and as if the river itself shared in her sorrow, the first drop of a tear fell from her eye. Her tears shimmered in the twilight, and as they touched the ground, something extraordinary began to happen. The water that flowed at her feet began to rise. At first it was just a trickle, but soon it became a torrent, and the river surged beyond its banks. Akira's tears, her sorrow and her loss, fueled the river's anger. The water rose higher and higher, rushing toward the village. No one in Edema had ever seen the river like this. The village, usually calm and peaceful, was now flooded. The waters swelled, carrying with them the cries of the river spirit, Akira. The villagers scrambled in panic, trying to save their homes from the rising waters, but the river showed no mercy. It had become an unstoppable force, as if the land itself wept. The sky darkened as the rain began to pour. The villagers stood in their homes, unable to sleep, too afraid to venture outside. The floods came with no warning, and no one knew the cause. The people of Edema had lived alongside the river for generations, but never before had they seen it so enraged, so vengeful. At the heart of the village, a figure stood on the edge of the rising water, watching in horror. Kofi, a young man from the village, had stolen the beads. He had come across them when the mermaid had placed them by the river, and something inside him had stirred. Desperation, greed. He had heard the stories of the beads' magic, of their power to grant wealth and success. He thought it would be easy. Just take them, run, and sell them far away where no one would know. But as the river swelled with rage, Kofi realized the terrible mistake he had made. His hands trembled as he looked at the beads, still clasped tightly in his palm. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He didn't know the river could get so angry. He didn't know the mermaid could cry. The floodwaters reached Kofi's ankles, and the village continued to drown in the relentless tide. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to leave. He had to get away from the village, from the river, from the curse he had brought upon them. The beads burned in his palm as if alive, as if they were punishing him. And so, with a heavy heart and no hope of redemption, Kofi set off, determined to escape the wrath of the river. The village of Edema was almost unrecognizable. The floodwaters had swallowed entire homes, and the familiar paths that the villagers once traveled with ease had become rivers in themselves. What had once been a peaceful haven was now a nightmare. The only thing that remained the same was the mournful cry of the river. It echoed through the night, a sound so sorrowful that even the birds refused to sing. Kofi, however, was already far from the village. He had left in the dead of night, carrying the beads with him, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. As he walked through the darkened paths, his mind raced with thoughts of what he had done. The beads, the beautiful shimmering beads, had burned through his hands ever since he had taken them. It was as if they were alive, pulsating with an energy he couldn't understand, and they grew hotter with every step he took. He had been told of the beads' power, the stories from the elders of how they were sacred gifts given to the mermaid Akira by the river itself. Those who possessed the beads would be blessed with wealth, beauty, and favor, while those who took them without respect would suffer. Kofi had heard the warnings but had never truly believed them. What could a story of magic really mean in a world like his? He had lived a life of struggle, his family barely able to make ends meet. The promise of wealth was too tempting. He believed that with the beads he could change his fortunes, provide for his family, and be free from the burdens that had held him back. But now, as he trudged through the muddy road, the weight of his actions began to press down on him. The beads felt like a curse in his hands. He glanced at them again, their iridescent glow flickering as they twisted in his grip. "What's happening?" he muttered to himself. But there was no answer. The beads did not speak, nor did the river. But he could feel it, the anger, the power, the relentless pull of the water. By the time Kofi reached the outskirts of the village, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape. He hadn't slept a wink, too afraid of the strange sensation that gripped him. He knew he had to leave Edema, but he didn't know how far he had to go to escape the river's curse. It seemed as if the land itself was crying out for forgiveness. When he finally reached the city, the bustling streets greeted him like a new world. People walked by without a care, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded just miles away. Kofi made his way to the market where traders from all over the region sold their goods. He knew he could find someone here who would be willing to buy the beads. There was no need for him to speak of the river's magic or its origin. He just needed to get rid of them and escape the floodwaters that seemed to follow him. But as he approached a trader, a strange feeling washed over him. His hands began to sweat, and the beads burned hotter than ever. It was as if they were rejecting him, telling him to turn back. But Kofi ignored the warning. The trader, an older man with a weathered face, eyed the beads with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "These beads, where did you get them?" the man asked, his voice low and cautious. Kofi hesitated. He had not expected the question. He tried to sound confident, but the words caught in his throat. "I found them," he lied. "They are valuable. I need to sell them." The old man studied him for a long moment, his sharp eyes narrowing. Finally he nodded. "I'll take them," he said, reaching out to take the beads from Kofi's trembling hands. As soon as the man touched the beads, a strange thing happened. The beads seemed to come alive. They shifted in his grasp, their iridescent glow intensifying. The trader recoiled in shock, his face paling. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "This is not normal." Before Kofi could respond, something even more bizarre occurred. The beads began to twist and coil, their smooth, round surfaces turning into sharp, scaly shapes. A loud hiss echoed through the market, and Kofi felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The beads, now transformed into a slithering snake, twisted around the old man's hands. "Take them back!" the trader screamed, stumbling backward, his face contorted in fear. The snake coiled tighter, its scales glimmering with an unnatural light, and Kofi, in a panic, snatched the beads back from the trader. He watched in horror as the creature, once a beautiful and enchanting piece of jewelry, now wriggled like a creature of the night. The snake hissed, its eyes glowing like fire, and Kofi felt its power, its venomous rage. The trader was left shaken, his hands trembling, but the snake had no intention of leaving him in peace. With a final hiss, the snake lunged forward, and the trader, terrified beyond reason, fled from the market, leaving Kofi standing alone. Kofi's heart raced as he looked at the snake now writhing in his hands. This was no ordinary creature. The beads had cursed him, cursed everyone who dared to touch them. He could feel the power surging through his veins, the same power that had caused the river to flood the village of Edema. He realized now what he had done. The beads were not just magical, they were dangerous. He turned to leave the city, his mind racing. There was no safe place for him now. The river's wrath followed him like a shadow. It seemed that no matter how far he traveled, the curse of the beads would always catch up with him. As Kofi made his way back to Edema, the snake coiled tighter around his hands, its eyes burning with anger. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he had to return what he had stolen. The villagers, the river, and Akira herself, none of them would rest until the beads were returned. But Kofi had no idea how he would make it right. He only knew one thing for certain. The curse of the beads was far from over. Kofi's journey back to Edema felt like a long, endless march through an unforgiving world. Each step seemed heavier than the last, and the snake, the cursed beads, had become a constant reminder of his mistake. It hissed and coiled around his hands, its scales glimmering in the moonlight, its venomous eyes following his every move. Kofi had never been more aware of the power he had unleashed, and every step forward seemed to carry the weight of the river's wrath on his shoulders. The once peaceful road leading back to Edema now seemed like a dark tunnel. The trees loomed over him, their branches reaching out like bony hands trying to grab hold of him. The whispers of the wind seemed to carry the voices of the villagers, their cries of anguish as the floodwaters swallowed their homes. Kofi's chest tightened with guilt. He had done this. His greed, his desperation for wealth, this was the price of his ambition. He had hoped that by leaving the village he could escape the consequences. But as he neared the outskirts of Edema, the floodwaters seemed to stretch out ahead of him, a vast sea of sorrow and despair. The river had not receded, and the village was still trapped in the watery chaos. The river had not forgotten its loss, and neither had Akira. As Kofi entered the village, the familiar sight of the houses, now partially submerged, filled him with dread. The streets, once lively with children playing and villagers greeting one another, were now silent. The only sound was the relentless rush of the river and the occasional wail of the wind. The floodwaters seemed to have swallowed everything, the crops, the homes, the joy that had once filled Edema. All that was left was an overwhelming sense of loss. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the riverbank. There, standing at the water's edge, was Akira. Her long dark hair flowed like a river in the wind, and her eyes, those deep, sorrowful eyes, locked onto him. She had not seen him arrive, but it was as if she had known all along that he would return. There was no anger in her gaze, no accusations, only sadness, deep and unending. Akira stepped forward, her bare feet barely touching the ground, as if she were a spirit rather than a living being. The snake coiled tighter in Kofi's hands, its hiss growing louder. Kofi held it out toward her, trembling. I have returned what I took, Kofi stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The beads. I took them in greed. I didn't understand. I didn't know the consequences. Akira said nothing at first. She reached out, her hands moving slowly, as if uncertain of Kofi's sincerity. When her fingers brushed the snake, it froze. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the snake uncoiled, its body slithering into the water with a final hissing sound, leaving only the beads behind. Kofi dropped to his knees, overcome by a wave of guilt and shame. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I could change my life, but now I see I've only brought pain. Akira remained silent, her gaze never leaving him. The tears in her eyes reflected the sorrow of the river. She did not speak of forgiveness or anger. She simply stepped forward and placed her hand on Kofi's shoulder, her touch cool and gentle as if trying to comfort him. But there was no comfort for Kofi, only the heavy weight of what he had done. Akira, Kofi said, his voice thick with emotion. Please tell me how I can make this right. I'll do anything. I can't live with this. For a long moment Akira stood silently, her eyes filled with the weight of the river's sorrow. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but laced with an unshakable power. Your journey has only just begun, Kofi, she said. The river has taken what was lost, but it is not enough. The beads are not just for you or for me. They are the river's soul, and they carry the essence of all things that flow through it. You must return them to their rightful place, not just in the river, but in the hearts of those you have hurt. Kofi looked up at her, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had to do. The village had suffered, his greed had caused it, but there was something more, something deeper. Will the river ever forgive me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Akira's gaze softened. The river does not forgive, Kofi. It does not forget. It flows onward, as must you. What matters now is how you move forward. Kofi stood slowly, his knees aching from the weight of his guilt. The beads lay before him, shining softly in the fading light. He reached out to take them, but this time it was different. The beads no longer burned in his hands. They felt light, almost weightless. He had learned the lesson, but the lesson was not yet finished. As he held the beads in his hands, Akira stepped back into the water, her form blending with the river's current. Her voice, gentle and distant, reached Kofi one final time. Return to the village, she whispered. You cannot change the past, but you can help heal the future. With those words, Kofi was left standing alone on the riverbank, holding the beads that had brought him both despair and understanding. The river's waters calmed around him, no longer a raging torrent, but a quiet, flowing stream. The floodwaters had receded, and though the village was still in ruins, there was a sense of peace, as if the river had granted the land its first breath of hope. Kofi knew what he had to do. He had to return to the villagers, to the people he had hurt, and show them the true meaning of the beads, the meaning of sacrifice, redemption, and the river's unyielding power. Kofi stood at the edge of the river, beads in hand, the cool breeze ruffling his clothes. The village of Edema lay in ruins, the floodwaters now receding slowly, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Homes that had once been vibrant and full of life were now hollow, their walls and roofs battered by the relentless current. The crops that had sustained the villagers were drowned beneath the murky waters. The village, once peaceful, was now scarred by the flood that had ravaged it. But despite the damage, there was a faint glimmer of hope in the air. The river had calmed, the angry surge had abated, and the river's wailing had faded into a soft murmur. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for Kofi to return. With the beads still glowing softly in his hands, Kofi walked slowly through the village, past the debris and the wreckage. He had come to realize that it was not just the physical damage that needed repair, it was the hearts of the people. They had been torn apart by the flood, their livelihoods washed away, their spirits broken. And it was Kofi's fault. He had stolen the beads, his greed had caused the river's wrath, and it had cost the village more than he could ever repay. As he walked, the villagers began to notice him. They had heard the stories, the tales of the flood, the strange disappearance of the beads, and the mermaid's sorrow. Some watched him from their homes, others approached him with wary eyes. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of unspoken blame. Kofi knew that the people would never forgive him easily, and they shouldn't. He had stolen their peace, their joy, their very lives. He made his way to the heart of the village, where the river met the land. The floodwaters had receded here, and the muddy banks were exposed once more. The sight of the river, once a symbol of life, now a source of destruction, filled Kofi with an overwhelming sense of guilt. He knew what he had to do. The villagers gathered around, unsure of what to expect. Some whispered among themselves, casting doubtful glances at Kofi, while others simply stood in silence. Kofi took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the weight of his actions. "I have returned what I took," Kofi said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I am the one who stole the beads from the river, and I am the reason this village suffered. I thought I could change my life. I thought I could make things better, but I was wrong. The river is not a tool to be used. It is a force of nature, a spirit that must be respected." The villagers listened, some nodding in silent agreement while others frowned, unsure of how to respond. Kofi continued, his words coming more easily now, the burden lifting as he spoke. "The river has taught me something," he said. "It is not about wealth or power. It is about balance, about giving back to the land and to each other. We cannot take without returning. We cannot live without respecting the forces that sustain us. I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I have done." He held the beads up to the villagers, letting them see the glow that had once burned with anger, now calm and soft. The villagers watched, their eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. For the first time since the flood began, there was a sense of stillness, as if the world itself was listening. Kofi knelt by the river's edge, placing the beads gently into the water. As they touched the surface, the river seemed to stir. The water rippled, and a faint glow appeared beneath the surface. Akira's voice reached Kofi's ears once more, soft and distant. "You have returned what was lost, Kofi," she said. "You have understood the river's true power. The village will heal, but it is not just the land that must recover. The hearts of the people must also mend." The villagers watched in awe as the river seemed to pulse with life, its waters shimmering as if responding to Akira's words. Slowly, the waters began to settle, the river returning to its normal course, its once turbulent currents now peaceful once again. The floodwaters, which had swallowed Edema, receded completely, leaving the village with the promise of renewal. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, now began to approach Kofi. Some still held their suspicions, while others stepped forward with cautious steps. A few elders, their faces weathered by age and experience, looked at Kofi with a quiet understanding. "We have seen your remorse," one of the elders said, his voice deep and slow. "We have seen what the river has done to you. But remember, Kofi, the river does not forget. It does not forgive lightly. Your journey does not end here." Kofi nodded, understanding the weight of the elder's words. The road to redemption was not an easy one, and it was not one he could walk alone. He would have to work hard to earn the villagers' trust once more, to show them that he had truly changed. But the river had already begun its work of healing, and so too would the village, in time. As the sun began to set on Edema, casting a golden light over the village, the people of Edema came together. They began to rebuild their homes, their lives, their community. The spirit of the river, though calm, was still present in their hearts, reminding them of the balance they must maintain with nature. Kofi remained by the river, watching as the beads settled into the depths, their glow now a soft, eternal light. He knew that his journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. The village of Edema would heal, and so would he. The river's wrath had been powerful, but its forgiveness was even stronger. And as the last of the floodwaters receded, Kofi made a silent vow to the river, to Akira, and to himself. He would never forget the lesson of the beads. He would never again take more than he could give. If this story inspires you, please like for more mermaid tales.